about autism and some of my work, some of the work that I have done with animals. A question I've got right here is, does color affect fear in animals? What if an animal gets exposed to many, many, many different things? It won't be afraid of anything. I have been down in Mexico where they have cattle grazing along the highway, and they've seen everything along the highway. Nothing scares these cattle. The animals that are most likely to get scared are animals that don't see that many things. Okay, we've kind of gone over some of these things. I've got a picture there of a dog. There's also a slide there on some differences in the behavior of cattle. Now, the one really important slide is a slide that shows the different animal emotions. I've got a picture there that shows that Prozac works in dogs. I already talked about the genetic change in the horse that was discovered just very recently that made horses much easier to ride. And it's sort of like putting the horse on Prozac, but it was done with genetics. And he's a nicer horse, easier to ride, less likely to buck you off. And then the use of horses just spread all around the world after that. And then also the chariot was invented. Chariot is a small vehicle that one person stands in, and you can go very, very fast in a chariot. So this was a dog study. Let's skip over that. That's not that relevant. We can skip the dogs. Let's go to the study there about low fear dogs. There's a very interesting experiment with low fear dogs. See, animals that are genetically, this is important, even though this is in dogs, this would also apply to cattle because these are basic principles. Animals that are very high fear genetically, when you take them to a new place, for the dogs it was an animal shelter, for cattle it might be an auction yard for the cattle, and the ones with the high fear genetics are the animals that are going to get the most stress, the highest level of cortisol, and they'll be more likely to get sick than the lower fear animals. Also, you can call them either bold or shy. Now, the core emotions there, I want to make sure we definitely look at that slide that's right next to that one right there. That's a really important slide. Let's get that one up. That's got, it's right after the dog slide right there. One of the things we do know, okay, here's a question here. Let me answer this question that just came up on the chat right now. And the question is, are there genetic differences in calmness of the animal during slaughtering? Yes, definitely. Absolutely, definitely. There are genetic differences. My student, that I had back in the 90s, named Bridget Fossonay, she did some of the very first studies on genetic differences in cattle. And cattle that jump all around and they get bellow and they get all excited when you handle them, those animals had poor meat quality. The animal, like let's say if you have a group of cattle at the slaughterhouse and most of the animals are calm and you've got one animal that's trying to jump the fences, that's the animal that's more likely to get bruised. That's also the animal that may have really bad meat quality. And so there are definite genetic differences. Now, the way to differentiate between a genetic difference in an animal and an environmental effect is if the cattle have all had the same experience. Okay, I'm going to just give an example. You might have some cattle you had out on pasture with maybe one or two people herding those cattle. All of their experiences are the same. Then maybe bring them to an auction yard. They're sold, go together as a group, go to the slaughterhouse as a group. In other words, all of their experiences are the same. Then you can see differences that are genetic. But yes, there definitely is genetic differences in calmness. And when you read the scientific literature, it may say they're either high fear or low fear, high temperament or low temperament, or they may be bold or shy. There's a lot of different wording being used in the literature, and it means the same thing. So if you're looking at fearfulness, it can be called fear, fear levels, calmness, bold versus shy. That's a wording that's showing up a lot now in some of the real recent literature. Now, there's a slide there on the core emotions. It's right after this picture of the dog that you have up right now. I really want to get that slide up. That's a really, really important slide. These are the basic emotional systems that all animals have. And when cattle get very excited, when you handle them, that's fear. Okay, now there's a question here. Good. Let's talk what Victor has to say here. How best do we assess fear in farm animals? One way is, how do they react to sudden novelty? For example, if I took one of these umbrellas, it just goes like that and just opens suddenly. The animal that has the highest fear genetics is going to be the animal that'll have the biggest reaction. Jump away, have the largest flight zone, be the animal less likely to approach the novel object. Remember the slide I showed previously that showed the cattle coming up to the board with a piece of paper attached to it, and that the one animal comes up and touches that first. That'd be a low fear animal. That's called an approach a novel object test. Let's just go over some of the tests that we can do for fearfulness. Approach a novel object, and that's often done with a object that doesn't move. You know, it could be a chair, it could be anything. And what you notice there on that slide, how your dark brown animal is standing back. You've got one animal, he's a low fear, bold animal. He's walking right up to the clipboard. And then that dark brown animal on the left-hand side of the slide is standing back. Now, right there, you are seeing differences in fearful. The dark brown animal on the left that has a dark brown face is a higher fear animal than those animals with the white on their face. Now, these are the emotions. All people and animals have these basic emotional systems. You have fear, and you can have high fear, low fear, or medium fear. Now, anger is a different emotion. If you walk out onto the pasture and the bull just comes after you, or the cow attacks you because you're touching her calf, that's anger. And then you have separation distress or panic. There's actually two separate things here. You have fear, and that's showing up when you might be handling them. But the separation anxiety, that's a different emotion. Okay, if I take the calf away from the mother cow, and both the mother cow and the calf are bellowing, that's separation stress. That's actually a different emotion. And this is the same emotion that would be happening if you get one cattle by himself. This can be very dangerous in slaughterhouse. You get one animal off by itself, and it's ramming the fence, trying to jump out. It's alone, and it wants to get back with its herd mates. It wants to get back with the other cattle. This is the animal that is going to injure somebody and injure them really bad, injure themselves. So you have fear. You can understand what that is. You've all been afraid. Okay, just think about maybe you had a near miss car accident where another car almost hit you, and you got really scared, and it took 30 minutes for you to calm down. I've had that happen. I was driving on the highway, and a board came off a trailer while I was driving. And I managed to avoid very serious accident. And I had a big fear response. My heart was pounding. I was swearing because I almost hit a big board. And it took me 20 minutes, 30 minutes to calm down. That's the same thing with an animal when they get frightened. So fear and panic are actually separate emotions. One is isolation stress, or the calf being taken away. Seek, that's the urge to explore. And one of the problems we've got in the scientific literature is that different research groups are using different names for the same thing. For example, for fear, bold and shy, high fear, low fear, same thing. Yeah, some of the new literature now for seeking, they'll call it exploration, high exploration or low exploration. In other words, wants to look at things. You see, you can have fear, but there's also an urge in animals to go look at things. For example, in cattle, there are some cattle, when they were studied with GPS collars, that they'll go out and graze a lot of pasture. Or, okay, let's just go back to Victor's question about the behavior tests. You can have them put them in a small arena, approach a novel object, like maybe a bear, or approach a strange person. Also, behavior tests when you handle cattle. Okay, you're going to lock animals in the head restrainer for so they can get their vaccinations, so that you give them medicine, and then you assess their behavior while they're in that restrainer, while they're held in the head holder. That's called a shoot score test. And very simple scoring would be: it stands still, it moves intermittently, it's moving constantly, and the fourth score is basically crazy. It's just trying to bust out. Simple scoring system. Another scoring system is that when you let the animal out of the head restrainer, how fast does he run? And that also is related to their temperament. That's called the exit speed score test. You can test it with electronic equipment. Okay, this is some good questions here in the chat. Okay, that's a very interesting question. Can a short latency to an object have a negative and a positive effect? The animals that will approach a novel object quickly and touch it, maybe something like a strange looking chair, those would be your tamest animals. Now, there's two ways that you can handle cattle. You can lead them. This is groups of cattle out on pasture. You can lead your cattle, or you can drive your cattle. And both methods work. But you have some of these super tame animals, you can lead them, but they may not want to drive. So that would be negative. You can also get really tame animals that can get to pushing and shoving on people, and that could get dangerous. If you're feeding some cattle and they're pushing and shoving, you want to wait, let them stand back, then you put the feed down, because you want to make sure that you don't accidentally reward the pushing and shoving. Now, Samuel here's asked, how can the level of fear in the animal be reduced at slaughter? First of all, no yelling, no screaming. Yelling and screaming at cattle has intent. They know you are mad at them. They are very sensitive to tone of voice. I talked earlier when the recorder was not on, so I want to review some of this stuff right now. Animals are sensory-based thinkers. They don't think in words. They think in what they see, pictures. They think in sounds. They think in smells. And animals are very sensitive to tone of voice. And yelling kind of tone of voice, that communicates to them that you are angry. So the most important thing at the slaughterhouse is handling them calmly. And I get asked all the time if animals are afraid of slaughter. I have found they're often more afraid of some of the visual distractions that I talked about earlier before the recorder got turned on. Things like it's real dark inside the plant. They see a strange vehicle parked alongside. There's a reflection. There's a sharp shadow. They can see people standing in front of them. They can see a piece of chain hanging down, a coffee cup on the ground, just, little things like that. And you remove those distractions, they'll walk right in. They also will not walk right into air blowing out through the slaughterhouse entrance. That needs to be fixed. If you have air blowing in their faces, they will not go in. But there's actually been studies, quite a few of them, and I reviewed some of these studies a long time ago in a paper I wrote called Assessment of Stress During Handling and Transport. And then in these studies, they looked at cortisol levels, handling for veterinary work out on the farm, and handling going into the slaughterhouse. And the range of cortisol values was the same in both places. It was the same. They I've been in situations where animals, cattle to see. You can shoot an animal or kill an animal in front of another animal. They don't understand what happened. But if you take the head off and they see the head removed, then they know something is drastically wrong. But if you shoot an animal, I've seen this many times with a stunner, and he just falls down, they don't realize what's happened. Or let's say you just bled the animal and he fell down. They don't tend to know what happened. But the other thing that can happen is if an animal, let's say, got really stressed right before slaughter, people were hitting it, screaming at it, it got stuck in the raceway, it was stuck in there for 20 minutes, then a fear substance comes out in the animal, and it probably is cortisol, and other cattle can smell that. It usually takes about 20 to 15 minutes for that to come out. So if you have some big handling mess where some animals get jammed in a chute and people are hitting them and screaming at them, then a fear stuff will come out. Now, we have a lot of very big slaughterhouses, and the cattle just walk right in, and the fear stuff does not have time to come out. Now, the question here was thresholds for ranking fear. Well, I talked about some of the tests you can do. Okay, you measure the behavior of your animal when you have him held in the head restrainer. Now, if you have really, really tame cattle that are completely tame, those you could walk up to and probably give them a shot. Well, it's going to be very difficult to see what the fear level is. Now, where an animal will show its genetic fear is when you suddenly show it something new, something kind of scary, like maybe seeing a flag for the first time. Never seen a flag before. I talked to one rancher, he had a hot air balloon land in his pasture, and you were able to tell the difference between the cattle. Now, most of the cattle that we have in the U.S. are raised out on big pastures. They don't see people every day. I do know that there's some cattle in Nigeria where they're herded and they're in close contact with people all the time. Those cattle are really tame. But where you'll see differences in behavior is when it's suddenly put in place totally new. Maybe put on a truck for the first time. Now, I had a slide in there of a dog on a slippery table. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of non-slip flooring for animals. It is just essential. Not really. If animals are skidding around, sliding around on the floor, they are going to be really, really stressed. But in the U.S., where we have cattle that are not completely tame, they will have some flights. You cannot walk up to these cattle and pet them. We use the shoot score, which is the behavior when they're held in the head holder, and the really calm one stands still. A 2 score would be intermittently moves. A 3 score continuously move, and a 4 score, the animal's completely crazy and trying to bust out. The other test that's used in the US a lot is exit speed scoring. How fast do they come out? Or you can use an electronic device, but for a lot of ranchers, that's too difficult. So you just score them. Did they walk? Use the horse gaze. Did they walk out, trot out, or run out? You can just score them for walk, trot, and running out. Now, on a lot of these tests, I've got a lot more information on my website. My website is just grandin.com. Grandin.com, just my last name, grandin.com. That's my website. There's also handling facility designs in that. There's some really, really interesting questions. Oh, here's a good question from Julia. What is a better method for determining social hierarchy in beef cattle? Okay, the easiest thing to do is to watch the order where they'll come up to a feeder. Okay, if let's say you put feed out for cattle, the boss cow, the head of the hierarchy, will go in there and get it first. And that boss will tend to push the other cattle away. Now, the thing that's really interesting is that the animal that is the top ranking animal in the social hierarchy to get access maybe to a water trough or a feed trough is not the same animal that will lead your herd. The leader of your herd and the boss cow at the feed trough are two different things. The boss cow at the feed trough, she's going to be first to get resources like feed or water. The leader that leads the group when you're herding them, that tends to be a low fear or bold, but very curious, high seek, high exploration animal. So that's kind of two different things you may see in your herd. And that might be something really, interesting to study, is just show how in the breeds of cattle that you have, how they, the differences between the top of the hierarchy, or the boss cows, we call it, for resources like feed and water, and the animal that leads the herd when you are moving them between pastures, moving them to different pastures. They're two different things. So that's a very, very simple way that you can tell some of the social hierarchy. There's two things: the leader, and then there's the animal that's first one at the feed. And then you might have the second one, the third one, and who gets at the feed first, or a water trough first. If they're drinking out of a pond, they're drinking out of something like that, they'll spread out. Now, one of the ways to prevent fights over feed, and we have ranchers that do this all the time, is they spread the feed out. But where you'll really see that hierarchy is where you have a small feed trough, and the boss animal will get in there and eat it all before the other cattle can get it. So if you have some kind of feed supplement and you want to feed that to them, spread it out so that the boss cannot eat it all and the other cattle can get some too. It's just a really basic thing, but that's a really good question right there. Okay, we talked some about thresholds of ranking fear. One of the things I did is I just got out and I started observing cattle. That's what I did. Now, okay, the dogs in the MRI machine. Now, what this showed is that animals really do have emotions. See, a lot of people have said, well, animals don't have emotions. Animals are not able to think because animals don't have language. That's right. Well, a scientist named Gregory Burns, he trained dogs to lay still in the MRI machine. And when they smelled their favorite person, the reward centers were activated in the brain. This absolutely proved that dogs have emotions. And those are all the dogs that participated in the experiment. And the thing that's really interesting is they trained these dogs to go up a little ramp and go in the scanner, lay down, and stay still for the brain scan. And it was all just done with positive reinforcement. The dogs would voluntarily do this, even though the scanner makes a lot of noise. But there's no question animals have emotions. And one thing they found in the study is that sensory-based stimuli, they learned really, really easily. And dogs' world revolves around smell, where cattle is a prey species animal. Okay, when cattle were living out in the wild, lions could eat them, maybe in Africa, or in the US, wolves might eat them, different types of predators. So a grazing animal, such as cattle or sheep, the eyes are on the side of the head. And the reason for that is so they can scan the horizon while they're grazing, looking for danger, wide angle vision, scanning, looking for little bits of motion, things that might be dangerous, where the predator will have eyes for better depth perception, but the prey species animal scans. Another thing that a prey species animal will do is that when they get hurt, they often cover it up, because when they lived in the wild, they don't want to show the lions that they're hurt. And so they'll cover up the fact that they're feeling pain. You want to find out if they're feeling pain, get some video cameras and spy on them at when nobody's around. Then they'll show you that they feel pain. And here's a study that shows that animals definitely do feel pain. No question about that. This was done in chickens and rats. And if you injure the joint, that animal will drink a really bitter tasting, really awful tasting painkiller to reduce the pain. And when the leg heals, they'll stop drinking. It's called a self-medication experiment. But animals definitely feel pain and they feel fear. Now, getting back to the slaughterhouse, they don't know what it is. The thing that amazed me when I first started a long time ago in the 70s is how easily cattle would walk into the slaughterhouse if I eliminated all these visual distractions. They didn't seem to know what's going. It didn't seem to make them afraid. No, but they feel pain. They feel fear. We've got a new message. Let's look at that. Okay, when carrying out stunning a cow, captive bull is the best. The best location is right here, right in the center of the forehead, right here. That's the best location. Center of the forehead. The other thing with captive bull, maintenance of the gun is just so important. Now, this is my new book right here on slaughter. And in this book right here, I talk about all the stress factors during slaughter. It's called The Slaughter of Farm Animals, Practical Ways of Enhancing Animal Welfare. It's available from Cabby in the UK and is available in electronic format. The other thing that's really, really important is measuring welfare indicators. I developed a system that's it's on my website. It's in my slaughter book. It's also on a website called animalhandling.org that our meat industry group has put out. And you measure the stunning. Okay, you measure it. Okay, let's say you slaughtered 50 animals. Well, out of that 50 animals, how many did you make unconscious with the first shot? Well, it should be like 95%. And the biggest problem I've seen with captive bolt stunning is poorly maintained equipment. And then you also measure other things like falling down. So you would measure stunning efficacy. You'd measure the percentage that fell down during handling. That should be low, like 1%. Okay, the number of animals you hit with a stick or some other bad method or twisted their tail. You measure vocalization in the stun box. That should be low, 5%. Measure dead on the rail. You see, you measure things. Then you can tell, am I getting better in how I'm handling my animal? Or am I getting worse in how I'm handling my animal? It's very, very important to measure things. It's really simple measures. Stunning efficacy. Keep track of it. How many animals how many animals did you stun correctly? This is a really good, very interesting question. Self-medication is not recommended for humans because they get addicted. Now, the thing with the animals is they did not do this experiment for a long enough time to allow the animals to get addicted. They stopped the experiment because addiction in humans with opioids, drugs such as OxyContin, really, really bad. Now, if they'd allowed this experiment to continue, the rats and chickens probably would have gotten addicted. And opioid addiction is a gigantic problem. And now you could also self-medicate with other medications like aspirin, for example. People do not get addicted to aspirin. Now, when we use things for pain relief in animals, we have to use things that human beings cannot abuse. Things like an arthritis drug, and it's called meloxicam. And nobody's going to take meloxicam. It's an arthritis drug, but it reduces pain. And so that's a painkiller that handling in here. I can no longer see the queue or the slides that's in the queue right now. Let's get some more questions up here. Now, some slides I'm pretty sure in here on flight zone, how that works. But the thing that's really important is that both an animal's experiences, do you handle them calmly, or you handle them roughly, sticks and screaming and hitting? That's going to affect their behavior. So both their experience and their genetics affects their behavior. They are both important. Okay, question here on cattle differentiating with colors. I don't think I answered that. Human beings have full color vision, and that's called a trichromat. And if you dissect out the back of the eye, there's a receptor in there for red, for blue, and for yellow. Now, cattle are missing the red receptor. Cattle and dogs, and most of all the wild animals, are missing the red receptor. Red will appear as gray or black. That's what's called a dichromat. So they can see yellow, green, and blue really well. Okay, the next slide on this graph, this is an important graph, because what this graph shows here is that when you handle animals roughly, you have much higher cortisol compared to animals that are trained to handle. Dairy cows cooperate when you handle them. They come into the milking parlor and cooperate. Beef cattle, quiet handling. You have much lower cortisol, which is stress hormone, compared to beef cattle, rough handling. So the basic principle here is calm handling, and when animals cooperate, where they will walk really quietly, like the cattle will just come in for milking, then you have very, very low cortisol levels. When you force animals to do things, then you have really high cortisol levels. Okay, we could probably go to the next slide. Okay, that shows training some antelope to cooperate. And this was in the zoo. And when you do this, you can get very, very low cortisols. We can go on to the next slide. I can't emphasize the importance of good stockmanship. There is a whole lot of research that shows that good, quiet stockmanship really, your animals are going to gain better. Okay, you want weight gain in your animals. You want lots of healthy calves, and you've got people that are good stock people. Your animals are going to have lower death losses, less bruises, more calves, and gain more weight. You know, and there's been a whole lot of studies that show that. These are just some of the studies. Let's go to the next slide. And this is a really important concept, and this applies to every kind of animal. If you're introducing a new animal, let's say you bought a new bull. Let's just say, for example, so a new bull is coming into your herd. When he first comes in there, I want his first experiences with you, because you just bought him, to be a good first experience. Because if his first experience with you is a bad first experience, he will not forget that. You bring him into a new set of corrals. Let's have a good first experience. Walk them in there, feed them in the corrals. Now, in the future, you may have to do something painful in the corrals, or something they don't like giving them a vaccination. But make the first experience into that new corral a good first experience. Their first experience with you, a good first experience. Feed them. It's very important, because if an animal has a bad first experience, this applies to any kind of animal. They can get fear memories that are very difficult to get rid of. Let's go to the next slide. Well, this just shows some emotions. This was in horses, and when they were taken to a new place or confronted with a novel object, when they had somebody, their person that rode them all the time with them, they were less scared. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. What this shows is basically animals make categories. This is very common in dogs, for example. When I'm in the US, we have a lot of dogs, so people walk them on leashes. And when the dog is on the leash, I protect my owner. And when I'm off the leash, I can play. Or we have a dog that's guarding a truck. And the dog learns, when I'm inside the cab of the truck, I'll bite somebody's hand off, because I got to defend the truck, my turf. But when I'm outside the truck, I'm friendly. I know a big black dog, and that's exactly how she is. She's outside the truck, she's your best friend, and if she's inside that truck, inside the cab, and you stick your hand in there, she'll bite it off. You see, that's an example of an animal making a category. They do that. Let's go to the next slide. Now that just shows a person making categories, especially if you're a visual thinker. And we can go on to the next slide. And well, let's skip over that. It's kind of complicated to talk about. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Well, let's say I talked earlier about how autism helped me understand animals. I'm an extreme visual thinker. And it's thinking where there's no language. There's no language like the way we have it. So you're really good with animals. You got to think about the sensory-based world that the animal lives in. It's not a word-based world. It's a world of sights, picture memories. Okay, good. Now we're getting into some of the basic animal behavior. What this shows right here is the flight zone of a flock of wild sheep. I took this picture in Australia, really wild sheep. And that's their flight zone. And if you have completely tame animals, then they'll have no flight zone at all. But the size of that bubble depends upon genetics and on the animal's previous experience. Let's go to the next slide. Now, right here, you can see the differences. I walked into these cattle and they moved away. See, what happened right there is I entered their flight zone. Now, again, if you have completely tame animals, then you're not going to have any flight zone. They'll just come up to you and you can stroke them. Well, we have a lot of cattle that are not completely tame, so he moves away. Then you have that white animal out there. He's looking at us. So there's kind of two zones. You can see this in wild antelopes, in Africa. You can see this in wildebeest. They will do the same thing. They have a flight zone, but then they're a prey species animal. So when they see you, they want to turn and look at you. But you see, at that point, I'm not in the flight zone of the white animal because he hasn't stood up, but he's watching me. He is watching me. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, this is a really good slide right here. If you're working animals like at the slaughterhouse and you have them in a single file race, what you want to do here is quickly walk back by them. You want to quickly walk back by them. And when you quickly walk back by them in the opposite direction, they'll go forward. But you've got to get past the point of balance at the shoulder. Now, I've got some videos on Grandin.com, and you have permission to download those videos and translate them. Anything that's on Grandin.com, you have permission to translate into some of your different languages. But this is a really useful little handling tool right here to get animals to go into the slaughterhouse. Just try it. It works. You quickly walk back by them in the opposite direction. And when you cross the shoulder, they'll go forward. We'll go to the next slide. That just shows how I got my business started. Let's skip through some of this. I'm going to have to go in about 15 minutes. I got another Zoom call coming up. Let's skip through some of these slides and get into, let's just skip over that. This just talks about how I got my business started. We go to some of the other slides, or we can just, oh, wait a minute. Here is an interesting question. Please do not scratch the screen. Now, I'm not doing that. I don't know why those red lines are on the screen. I haven't done anything to cause that. I don't know why those red lines are there. Okay, but okay, now that's one of my drawings right there of a curved facility. Let's talk about that drawing, why that's designed the way it is. Because as you put the cattle in the round pen, you're coming around the bend. Cattle have a natural behavior to go back to where they come from. So they're coming on around the bend, natural behavior to go back. Cattle always want to go back to where they come from. See, they've got some basic behaviors. They have the flight zone, which will be absent if they're completely tame. They have the point of balance at the shoulder. I showed you that. They also have a behavior where they want to go back to where they came from. And that's one of my systems right there that I designed for a large slaughterhouse. That just shows another curved system for a very big feed yard in the US. Let's go to the next slide. And for some reason, it's just taking a while to change the slides. But that shows one of my curved facilities. That talks about non-slip flooring right there. We've got, now, one thing I want you to look at in that picture, notice that that animal is looking at the sunbeam. That's a sunbeam. This is really important. It's really important to measure some animal welfare indicators at the slaughterhouse. Bruising, falling down, they're dead when you hang them on the rail, really important. Vocalization, bellowing. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is some handling scoring that was done in the US. These are actually very good scores. This is a measurement system that we use for handling in the US. You can use it at auctions, you can use it on ranches, you can use it at slaughterhouses. And these are the things that we score. And these are actually very, very good scores. These are scores you can be proud of. And so, you have less than 1% falling down. I've been in places where you had 20 and 30% of the cattle falling down. And then they also were doing some scoring on how fast they came out. This would have been a big feedlot where they had a lot of cattle, and how many cattle run. These are things I can measure. And the advantage of measuring is then I can tell, am I getting better in my handling, or is my handling getting worse? You manage things that you measure. It's really important. Let's go to the next slide. This shows some data that I collected on stunning a long time ago, and it shows the power of measurement. In 1996, this is really bad. I went to a whole bunch of slaughterhouses. Only 30% could shoot 95% of the cattle dead with a single shot. And then after a large company such as McDonald's started inspecting the slaughterhouses, these stunning scores greatly improved. This shows right here the power of measurement. Let's go to the next slide. This just shows the temperament. This is the temperament scoring system. There were questions about this earlier. Really simple. The 1 would stand still, 2 has intermittent movement, 3 is moving all the time when they're held in this, and a 4 is completely berserk and trying to jump out and thrashing all around. Let's go to the next slide. We've got to be careful. Let's skip over that. We're running out of time. Well, this is just an example, like the types of cattle you have. If you treat them right, they actually are high on the nurture trait, and they like to be stroked. Stroke them, stroke them. Don't do this. That's hitting. Stroke them, stroke them. Make it feel like the mother's tongue. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, here are some basic animal welfare critical control points for measurement. Really important slide for your very, very basic animal welfare. Handling scoring. Swollen legs, sores, and cuts and injuries on them. Lameness, difficulty walking. And there's scoring tools for measuring difficulty walking. Filthy, dirty animals, skinny animals. If you have an indoor housing, ammonia levels. This would be only for indoor housing. Heat stress, this should be less of a problem because you're using the zebu type of cattle. And coat condition, that would be things like ticks all over them, lice on them, bald spots on the coat, though that's not acceptable. And then obviously, of course, basic health, death losses, and basic health of your cattle or your pigs, whatever animal it is. Just very, very basic things you can measure in handling. And I would also measure bruising. That needs to be on this list, bruising at the slaughterhouse. Bruising is a really important thing to measure. Let's go to the next slide. Now, lameness, I want to just discuss the critical control point approach. I can't measure everything, but lameness is a really good thing to measure because this slide lists all the different things that can make an animal lame. Rough handling, and they injure their feet. We have some problems with rapid cattle growth. That probably will not be a problem in Nigeria. Foot problems. That's often from standing around in muck. But lots of different things can make cattle lame. If you've got really hardy cattle, oh, here's a good question. Maximum distance a cattle can walk without compromising their welfare. That is, for some of your cattle, it'll be a long way. I think the thing you need to look at is if they're good and they're not lame, they can walk a long, long way. I don't want to give a number because what in the countries where we bred for meat, it's actually made the cattle weaker. When you just breed for meat, they get weaker. They'd be able to walk less far. But a lot of the cattle that you have probably can walk a long distance. I would rather, instead of telling you a maximum distance, I would rather say, how are they doing on lameness? That's the important thing. See, these are outcome measures, and the OIE now is going towards, we're going to be doing outcome-based measures, and that's fine. If they're not lame, they can walk a long, long distance. I do not want to put a number on it because a number that might be appropriate for highly selected cattle in the U.S., they can walk a much shorter distance than some of the cattle you've got. So if they're healthy and they're walking normally, not lame, they can walk a long distance. Let's go to the next slide. This just shows a leg conformation chart. We've had some problems when we just breed for meat with getting bad legs. It shows a correct one there. It shows two leg defects. You start seeing these problems, you don't want to do this. This has been a problem where bull semen was brought in from other countries, the US or from Europe, to improve your cattle. And it's breeding more just for meat. And you might start seeing some of these leg conformation problems. These can get really serious, and you'll end up having cattle that will not be able to walk a long distance because their leg, the shape of their leg is wrong. Scoring of hoof condition, yes, that's a really important measurement. That's one of the things you can measure is hoof condition. Lameness and hoof condition, absolutely yes. You see, and that's a good example of an outcome-based measurement that fits in well with your conditions. Can go on the next slide. That's an example of a straight leg that's awful. What you're seeing right there is a straight leg, really bad. The next slide. That shows a pig with a bad foot, bad leg conformation. Now, I've seen the same bad foot in cattle, really bad. And it occurred in cattle that were just bred for meat, for lots of muscle. That's a horrible foot. And I was in a pig just bred for lots of lean meat. Let's go to the next slide. There's crooked claw. That is a genetic defect. As the animals get older, the claws cross, a really bad defect. Go to the next slide. I think maybe we need to stop here. We're getting into some other animals, and I'm going to have to go in about 5 minutes. The rest of these slides show problems with excessive breeding just for meat. Yes, this is the kind of question I want to answer. Yes, you do need to select against bad leg conformation. What worries me is a lot of the cattle you have now would have good leg conformation, but the cattle you bring in some bull semen from Europe or maybe the US, and you cross your cattle with US or European cattle, watch, be very careful, make sure they have good leg conformation. Also, if you do that, you may lose a lot of heat tolerance because the zebu cattle are very, very tolerant to heat, where European and British cattle, which a lot of that semen would be, those animals have poor tolerance to heat. You know, this is just showing some dog breeding stuff. Okay, that's what you not do. That, from a breeding standpoint, bulldog, modern bulldog, disgusting. That animal's disgusting. And it has terrible welfare. It can't breathe because it's got such a smashed in face. It can't walk. It has to have surgery to have its babies. That's disgusting. And that's an example of breeding that's completely bad. And that's what a bulldog used to look like years and years ago. See, that dog functioned. And then we got into this horrible looking dog that we've bred now. Got to be careful what we breed for. You overselect for any trait, you'll wreck your animal. That is a disgusting horse. You know, a little bit of a dished face is really nice. This is a horrible horse that's going to have trouble breathing. I have real serious problems with some of the stuff that's going on with animal breeding. Let's look at quality of life for an animal. We need to prevent suffering. Okay, don't hit them with sticks. Don't scream at them. But we also need to have animals having some positive interactions, like being stroked by the herdsperson and having some positive life. And I think a lot of cattle living in Nigeria, when they're out in the pasture with their herds people, they have a good life. And then they get brought into the auction market and they're being screamed at and hit. Well, that's really bad suffering. We need to be preventing that. Let's go to the next slide. We're just about through with the slides. And that's some of my books right there. I also have a book on animal welfare that's on the next slide. I've got a new edition out. This could be used as a textbook at the university. And this is a good question. What is your experience with awareness on proper handling? I've been in the U.S. cattle industry for 50 years. Cattle handling in the U.S., 20 years ago was terrible. Cattle handling in the U.S. has really improved. Our cattle association, our cattle producers association, has put on workshops on handling. Handling of cattle in the U.S. has really improved. And that's because there's been a lot more education on this. And our cattle raisers association has done workshops, numerous workshops all around the field. Advice for upcoming scientists. Okay, you are the ones that are going to make things better in the future. You are the future. And let's just start with basics. Let's stop no screaming at cattle. Stop hitting cattle. Don't break their tails. I mean, let's just start with preventing some of the really rough, awful handling that people have done. Reducing bruising. Also, don't overload trucks. Well, and there's a lot of things. The thing I have found on handling, you have to constantly measuring it. People have a tendency to go back to rough methods unless they are constantly supervised. I have found that even in our slaughter plants here, I've worked on getting them really good, but there has to be continuous measurement. Otherwise, it's they go back bad on you. It's sort of like speeding on the highway, and we have the police out there with a device to measure speeding, and that reduces speeding on the highway. It's kind of the same thing. Management's got to care about doing it right. Management has to care about doing things right. How do I combine academics with writing books? Sometimes that's difficult. During COVID, I could not get out in the field, so I did a lot of writing. But it's very important for academics to get out into the field. Really, really important. You need to be a good academic, but also get out in all the places where cattle are being handled and cattle are being raised, and see what people are doing out in the field. Really, really, really important. Okay, I was diagnosed with autism at age 4. I had no. We've got a really good future in animal welfare. No, we have got to improve how we handle cattle, and we have to look at things. If someone photographs an auction market and you're screaming at cattle and hitting them with sticks, that's going to make a very bad impression on people all around the world. Yeah, we know there's a lot of future, and also you have better welfare and better handling, you'll have more productive cattle too. So I think that's the end of my presentation, and It's been wonderful to be with you today. Well, fish handling, fish feel fear. There is a lot of patents now for fish stunning equipment. So a lot of companies are doing various methods of stunning fish because they definitely feel fear. Very definitely, the fin fish feel fear. Now, clams and oysters, no. There's not enough nervous system in clams and oysters to worry about animal welfare. Scallops, I don't have to worry about animal welfare. But fish have enough of a brain where they definitely feel fear. That would be your fin fish. And in my book, Improving Animal Welfare, Practical Approach, I do have some information there on fish. Also, I'd recommend looking up articles on Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a wonderful source, it's free, of finding scientific articles. You might also have a subscription to Scopus or Science Direct. And I strongly recommend using these databases, but the PubMed database in the US and the Google Scholar are free to use to give you access to scientific papers. I strongly recommend that all the students make use of that. Really wonderful thing. And it's been absolutely great to be here today. And thank you so much for having me. Even though it's now not the middle of the night in the US now, it's now 6:30 in the morning. But it's been great being here, and I'm really happy that we were able to make this work. This was just wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now the question here on mentoring African researchers. Yes, that's definitely a possibility. I remember we had, I had one student that came to me that's something I could do. Now, I have had students write to me, and they'll write on a subject that's totally not in my field, like maybe parasites in cattle or something like that, something that's totally not my subject. I'm going to be interested in a student that, maybe has done some work in animal welfare, then wants to go back to Nigeria, continue on in your country. Yes, that's something that I would be interested in. And the thing is, I just want to say, we've got a lot of students today on this call. Students are the future of your country. And I've done a lot of talks all around the world. Since COVID, I haven't been doing any international travel at all with COVID. I'm just doing some inside my own country travel right now. But students everywhere, you're the future. I can't emphasize that enough. Students are the future. And we need to find practical, sensible ways to make things better. That's what we need to do. Oh, I got 3 new messages here. Take a look at that. Well, we just have to, have to look into things. One thing I can say, there's always the issue of funding, but I would be interested in mentoring somebody who truly wants to, after they get the degree, go back to your country and work on improving things. No, there's a lot of problems and things we need to solve in the world, and you can't fix everything, but you could work on improving cattle handling at auctions or slaughterhouse. Those are things that you could do. I also strongly recommend writing it up in the scientific literature. Really important. One thing that's really helped my career is I did a lot of writing, both in the cattle magazines and in the scientific journals. You need to do both and get information out there. And we need people who can explain, how do we actually fix something? That's really important. Not just complain about it, actually make sensible, practical change. That's what we need to be doing. I'm going to just in a few minutes have to get on to my next talk, and I'm really glad we were able to make this work. It was wonderful to be here on Zoom. Thank you so much for having me.
So thank you very much, Professor Grandin. That was so educative and informative. I'm very sorry I lost my internet, So I needed to tell my colleague to share the slide.
Okay.
So,
Well, you have permission to copy the slides on some of those slides in there. You're not going to need, but some of the things on the measurement, the basic handling, the animal emotions. I'd say maybe about half those slides would be really good. Some of the autism stuff you probably may not want to copy, but that's fine.
good.
You have permission to copy and translate. You can go on my website, grandin.com, copy and translate stuff. You have permission to do that.
Let me hand you over to Dr. Luashim from Germany. Dr. Yasere?
Thank you, Professor Temple. Thank you for
it was really great, really great to be
the invitation, and we have really learned a lot from you. Thank you for your time. I know it's very early for you where you are.
It was 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
In fact, I didn't realize how early it was going to be, and
just because of the time zone, but we really appreciate that you are able to make it. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, wonderful to talk to you, and I'm going to leave the meeting now. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. We are very grateful. Temple, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, goodbye. And
goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.